Another animal to remind you how cool animals are. This is, I think it's probably just an American porcupine here. Another Joel Sartori picture. Let's see an ammonite here. This is an extinct group of mollusks. These are big fossils, big animals. Sort of closely allied probably with the shelled nautilus, which we'll talk about in this lecture. Okay, phylum Mollusca, we're going to break this into two lectures. Today we'll talk about the cephalopods and these small marine mollusks. Actually, we don't talk about gastropods until Thursday. So as a group, the story here is diversity. Sponges, what do we say, there's about 5,000 species. Cnidarians, maybe 8. Another 5 of the flatworms, or maybe 10, I don't know. But regardless, here we're talking about almost 100,000 species in the phylum Mollusca. So much higher diversity. See about 55, so more than half of those mollusks are marine. About 30,000 are terrestrial, and only 7,000 are found in freshwater. All environments, from the deepest ocean, shallow continental shelves, brackish waters, the interface between saltwater and freshwater. We have hot and cold places on the land, moist and dry places. How do they get their food? Well, they can be filter feeders, they can be herbivores, detritivores, carnivores. They can be less than a millimeter to more than 20 meters. So huge diversity in this phylum. Human importance, important food source. Think about all the different bivalves that you eat: clams, mollusks, clams, oysters, scallops. Then throw in all the octopus, squid, even snails. Europe, they eat a lot of snails. Classes, so kingdom, Animalia, phylum Mollusca, class, Polyplacophora, Gastropoda, Bivalvia, and Cephalopoda. Okay, these are just the ones that we're going to talk about. The next diagram will show us there are more classes. These guys are much more minor, with fewer species. Scaphopoda, Monoplacophora, so on and so forth. We're just going to breeze over these and talk about Polyplacophora, Gastropoda, Cephalopoda, and Bivalvia. This is 7-Eleven in Japan, showing this is a popular snack in Japan called Ika. It's a dried squid. It's like a squid jerky. Those of you guys who've looked over the lab materials will recognize the fin here. So, great diversity of form and size and trophic ecology in the mollusks. And giant squid. Here's that chambered nautilus. Different other smaller squid, cuttlefish. This is the chitin octopus. So, lots of diversity. Now, in terms of their classification, and many mollusks have this shown here, the ciliated larval stage. So this is very early stages of development. Well, we can see that complete digestive system. We have mouth, anus. See the little cilia on here. This is called the trochophore larvae. Not all mollusk lineages have them. but it is probably a shared character of mollusks in general. And I guess probably more importantly, this trochophore larvae is homologous to another type of larvae found in annelids and relatives. Okay, and so the presence of this type of ciliated larvae defines a clade called Lophotrochozoans. Okay, so these are animals with a lophophore or a trochophore larvae. If we look on our phylogeny, right here we have the sponges, then we have symmetrical animals with tissue, including the radially symmetrical Nidarians. From here out would be all of the bilaterally symmetrical animals. So all of these animals are bilaterally symmetrical. Here, the Lophotrochozoans, so the presence of a lophophore or trochophore ciliated larva occurs here and applies to the annelids, the mollusks, and the platyhelminthes. Okay. So all of these are bilaterally symmetrical. From here out, these are the protostomic animals, so they develop a mouth first. So from arthropod over to the platyhelminthes, these are the protostomes. From here, this branch, including the echinoderms and the chordates, are the deuterostomes, and then we can break the protostomes up into the Lophotrochozoan. Okay. It's another way to see the same thing. So the main split here between the deuterostomes and all of these guys being the protostomes. So that split would be shown here on our phylogeny. And then inside of the protostomes, we have the Lophotrochozoans and the ecdysozoans. So these are the ecdysozoans here, arthropods, nematodes, and then the Lophotrochozoans are the annelids, mollusks, and platyhelminthes. We'll keep looking at this, but just an introduction. Okay, mollusks. I think one of the hardest things is just to look for the commonalities in such a diverse group. Each mollusk basically has four main body parts. They are cephalized. They do have a head end with concentrated sensory organs. Things like bivalves, which are more or less sessile. Filter feeders don't really have a lot of sensory structures and a real well-defined head end. In the head, we see this organ called the radula, which basically is like a tongue. It's used as like a conveyor belt. It contracts rhythmically and scrapes algae, can scrape through other mollusks' shells, and for predatory type of snails and things, it's a scraping tongue. Okay. We'll look at that a little bit more in detail. Second main body part is the foot. This is a muscular organ, and it's used for moving and for feeding. Okay, this is really variable. We'll again see the foot in the bivalves as kind of like an oar or a rudder for pushing through the substrate. But then when we look at something like a squid, the foot is then organized into tentacles, okay, or feet, legs in an octopus. Visceral mass is that part of the body that contains all the organs. And by the time we get to the mollusks, we have a very well-developed organ systems. So we're getting to the highest level of body complexity. And then mollusks always have a mantle mantle is there to secrete the shell, and can be used in respiration and locomotion. Okay, so this is just a generalized mollusk here. We see the head end with this radula here. Let me just quickly show you another picture of a radula. These things are pretty rad here. Radula. Let's look at one up close. You get a scanning electron micrograph of. You can actually identify different mollusks by the shape of the teeth on their radula. It's self-sharpening. These things, as they occlude with each other, they actually sharpen each other. To me, this is very similar to the machine that they use to grind off the top layer of asphalt and then recycle it when they're paving roads. That's how I kind of internalize the idea of a radula. Okay, that's in the head end of the animal. We have the foot, which here is just simple, more similar to like a snail. We have the visceral mass containing heart, right? There's gill, digestive gland, stomach, so lots of different organs working together in organ systems. And then the mantle, which secretes the shell. Okay, so here's more representative. This is that hypothetical ancestor of real generalized mollusk that we just looked at. It just looks pretty similar to these things called chitons, which we'll talk about in the polyplacophores. We really cover a lot of this in lab with the bivalves. See the mantle secreting the shell, visceral mass containing the intestines and the digestive gland, the foot. Here the foot is, in the cephalopod, is modified into tentacles and arms. We see inside there is a shell which is secreted by the mantle. Same thing in snails. Right? So when you look at it, thinking about these four main body parts, you can more clearly see the commonalities in the mollusk phylum. Okay, they do have a body cavity, a coelom, but it is greatly reduced. They have, again, well-developed organ systems. How do they breathe? Well, some breathe through gills, some breathe through lungs, or others breathe through a highly vascularized mantle. Vascularized just means it has lots of blood vessels that are there for absorbing oxygen. Okay. The gills, a lot of times, water is propelled or moved over those gills in order to increase the volume of water moving over, and which will result in more oxygen. That's a common theme in animals, is how do you get enough oxygen to supply all of your mitochondria and all your muscles, and you have to move more water over those gills. This is a kind of a unique circulatory system, which is called an open circulatory system, in that there is a heart and there's some blood vessels, but the blood is not always contained in a vessel. It doesn't go from a vein or artery to arteriole to a capillary to a venule to a vein, right? It goes maybe from an artery to a sinus, sloshing around in this cavity, and then back to the vein. Okay. Cephalopods, though, we're going to see these are things like squid, octopus, cuttlefish. They're unique in many ways, and they have a closed circulatory system. And we've already talked briefly about those larval stages. So again, we're looking at this body cavity found in mollusks. Okay, first class, we're going to look at the polyplacophora. How to remember them? I think they're most clearly defined by these 7 to 8 plates, right, on the shell. So they have many different plates. They have polyplacas, so many plaques or plates. They are marine. They're known as, their common name is chitin, and you find them a lot of times on rocky shores, and they are just there using their radula to scrape plant and algae material off of the rocks. Small animals, less than 30 centimeters. So, I've seen a few chitins this smaller. You can see some in the lab, some pictures of them. So what you're seeing on the top is those plaques or the plates underneath. They have that muscular foot, helps them to really just attach onto the rock substrate. Our second class here, cephala means what? Head. Poda means what? Foot. These are the head foot animals. Squid, octopus, familiar. Some of you know cuttlefish, maybe not others. And then you've got the chambered nautilus. So of the 90,000 species of mollusks, only about 700 are cephalopods. However, these are definitely the most unique and interesting of the mollusks here. So these can be very intelligent animals. They have highly developed nervous systems. The eye of cephalopods, if you just looked at the eye, you'd think they were closely related to vertebrates, but that eye has developed convergently, so independently, homoplasiosly, the cephalopods have developed an eye that's very complex and functions very well. Because they're so smart, right, these things are capable of problem solving. I heard a story about a octopus in a aquarium that was in a room in a tank. The keepers had a jar of the food on one side of the room, tank on the other side, and the food kept disappearing, and the keepers were kind of secretly accusing each other of overfeeding the octopus. So they set up a camera to see what was going on, why the food was disappearing, and the octopus was snaking its little tentacle out of the cage, flipping open the latch, opening the cage, crawling out, down, across the floor, up, getting the food, eating it, crawling back, up, into the tank, closing the lid and latching it each day. So this is really remarkable when you think about the other animals we've talked about and how sort of simple their behaviors are. And even in the mollusks, honestly, this is very unique in this specific class, the cephalopods. So they do have a shell. Some of the cephalopods, you don't see it, but there's like a cuttle bone in the cuttlefishes. You see this little pen in the squid, and then of course the nautilus have this big external shell. Chambers is gas filled. So again, here's that large shell. This is a cuttlefish. Cuttlefish are really neat. They can match texture and colors to their background. Chameleon's got nothing on a cuttlefish. All the different octopi, whatever, squid. Very cool group of organisms. There's that dissected squid, and we see that pen inside, which gives the squid some rigidity, sort of like a backbone or a, see that here, the internal shell. We're going to look at these in lab in some detail, the arms, tentacles, little funnel or siphon down here. So water pumped into the mantle cavity. Again, there's the theme, water pumped over the gill and out the siphon, which propels the squid kind of in a backwards direction. So they have achieved this sort of a jet propulsion system, drawn to the mantle cavity, attracting forces water out the funnel, and then they use that fin in the front to help them to steer through the water. Octopuses use their tentacles to crawl around. They kind of have like an umbrella type of locomotion where they, almost like a jellyfish, they'll spread out and then squeeze together and force water down. And okay, yeah, octopus. Here's a squid, and we can see that siphon or the funnel. What do they eat? They're carnivores. Have a sharp beak. Some of them have venom in their around their beak. They can eat and overpower fishes, crustaceans. Many of them we call benthic invertivores. So benthos, the benthos is the bottom layer in the ocean, and of course these vor means to eat. What do they eat? Invertebrates. So a lot of these cephalopods are really kind of specialized on eating things like crabs and different type of bivalves. They can use their arms and their suction cups to pull apart the bivalve, and then because they don't have bones, they can go into the shell and eat, or they can pull that clam out of the shell. Dioecious. Okay. Two what? Two households, two different separate sexes. So there are male octopus and there are female octopus. Alright. And they have just, it's mind-boggling, the courtship that goes into this, so which kind of indicates that the sexual selection is important, right? And that females are picky about who they mate with, and the male has to display the right behavior. They'll change colors like instantaneously when they go into courtship. The male manages to internally fertilize the eggs, so he packages sperm up in this structure called a spermatophore, and those vesicles are then inserted into the mantle cavity of females, and then so in that way the eggs are fertilized internally and then released later. Many cephalopods can store sperm. I think probably because they are largely solitary animals, and if they come across a suitable mate, they want to make sure to get some sperm, and then they can kind of file that away for when they are producing eggs. Some they'll go into like a little cavern, attach the eggs onto the top of the cavern, and then stay and guard the eggs. And then there are some things like this squid in the Pacific, they call them Humboldt squid. It's just a huge orgy of squid, they exchange sperm, fertilize the eggs, and then the female just broadcast attaches them or broadcast lays them, and they just get tangled up in the vegetation. So here's a good mama octopus. And I've heard some stories about these deep sea octopi that stay and guard their eggs for over a year, don't eat anything during that time, and basically wither away, and in some cases just die while they're guarding their babies. Here's the beak of some type of octopus, likely. Squid have them too. You can see them in the squid in the lab. A lot of times you'll find these left over in the stomach of things like whales or big fish after everything else gets digested. This is left over. I think it's probably made out of keratin. Alright, well, that is Mollusk Lectures Part 1. No, how do I shut this stupid thing